Hello and welcome to A Sense of Centerville in Washington Township, your place for stories about ordinary and extraordinary residents in the Centerville and Washington Township area. I'm Susan Melville from Centerville, Washington History, and I look forward to hearing your story. My guests today are Roy and Sue Turton. Roy and Sue Brown Turton grew up in the Centerville, Washington Township area. They began school together in the first grade at the consolidated school now known as Magsig. The Turtons' romance dates back to 1944-1945 school year when Roy Turton and Sue Ann Brown were fourth graders. The couple was married in 1955 at the Methodist Church on Franklin Street. As a wedding gift, Sue's parents offered the couple a choice between $100 cash or an acre of land. The Turtons chose the property. In 1962, they constructed a home where they raised their three sons. Thank you so much for being here today. It's rare to find a family that was born in Centerville and then lived here your whole life. So my first question is, there seems to be a lot of farms around here in the 50s, but neither of you grew up on farms. Can each of you tell me a little bit about your family life in Centerville when you were young? So Sue, let's start with you.
My parents moved to Centerville in 1926. There were 6 in our family, and they needed to have more space. They purchased a little over 7 acres on Brooks Road, which is in the southeast quadrant of Washington Township. And the house that they bought was in bad repair, and my dad went to work on it to make it livable. And they struggled through that time with their family. And my mom was a wonderful homestead woman. They raised gardens. She did canning of all kinds. And there were livestock there. There was a cow to produce the milk. There were horses for the kids to play with. There were chickens, but no goats.
So it sounds actually a lot like a farm, even though it wasn't didn't have crops.
Right.
But you had chickens and
Right.
a lot of the things that you would have on a farm.
Right.
Okay. How about you, Roy?
Well, my family moved here in 1934 from Claremont County, Ohio, and moved into a home that was owned by my uncle at the corner of Spring Valley and Yankee Roads. That home we lived in for several years. And then in 1940, we built a new house just to the north of that. And in that time, we had 8 acres there. We had pigs, we had sheep. We weren't farmers, but we lived in the country and, of course, enjoyed the country living. I helped farmers. I worked in hay, milked cows, things like that a young man could do. And we grew up in the country, and we feel like that was a big advantage to us.
I'm so glad you mentioned that you had animals. We talk about that when we bring the school tours in. We talk about the self-sufficiency of the people in the area during that time and how they provided a lot of the food for themselves. And so you're sharing an example of how you lived back then that was very self-sufficient, having chickens and milk from cows. So thanks for sharing that. Also that you had a graduating class of 23 students. I mentioned that to the school class that we had yesterday. So what was it like to go to school in such a small group? And we'll go with Sue again at the ladies first.
That beginning in first grade was a wonderful experience which lasted a long time, because there were 9 that started first grade together and we graduated together. Now there was an influx during that time, but that group of, we'll call ourselves kids, came through that time, and it was fun. we had fun in school. From first grade right straight through, we had wonderful teachers. You know, we remember all of them, and it was a great time.
That's so great that you enjoyed school. All right, Roy.
Well, in addition to that, there's of the 23, there is now 11 living, and we still have a closeness in that group. We will be having a reunion in September of the classes of the 50s, which Sue and I have been very active in over all these years. And then next year, we're planning a get-together because it will be 70 years since we graduated from Centerville. So there's been a lot of water under the bridge since that's happened. But we've been right here the whole time.
I love that you have been the connectors to keep everybody connected from that group.
Well, it's kind of a natural. Sue and I being two of the graduates, we've been right here. And when we lived on Ricks Road, which was for 61 years, we were kind of the center point of all of that activity. Back some years ago, we had a reunion for the classes of 28 through 41. And there was like 60, 70 people there, all graduates. And you talk about a beehive. Those people had a joyous time that you'll never forget. A fellow by the name of Walter Stubbs wrote us the kindest letter after that, and it was a pinnacle of his time as a graduate of Centerville schools. But he was just so joyous to have been a part of that, and we felt very good about the fact that we had done such a thing. That was mainly to Sue's family. Sue is 12 years younger than her next sister, so we had that gathering mainly for her sisters and brothers. And what a time we had.
What a privilege it is to have those people and to remember those stories. And it's so great to reminisce about past times. And we have a lot of compassion for ourselves as young people when we're older, I think. I mean, I consider myself older, even though I'm a lot younger than you guys. But okay, so I want to reminisce just a little bit more. Roy, I heard you competed a lot in sports during your time in high school. You seem to be a very accomplished athlete. What do you remember about sports in Centerville?
Well, that's a lot of the memories. You know, the older you get, the better you were. And it seems like that's been the case with us. When I was a senior, we were second in state in track as a team. I was second in the half mile, and I was the anchor on the mile relay team that consisted of Burton Smith, Ronnie Seitner, Laverne Sinclair, and myself. We had a high jumper that was first in state, and that was Gene Tullis. So we felt that we accomplished quite a bit by being second in state. You know, maybe we don't get the recognition that we feel like we should, because there was a championship baseball team in 28, and of course with the accolades of the basketball team recently and the football team back in the 70s, maybe, you know, it's a minor thing that we were just second in state, but we're pretty proud of it.
As you should be, for sure. And Sue, you didn't do sports, but what kind of things were you involved in high school?
Well, the school paper that came out monthly, it was a booklet that was published monthly, and all the grades had a little article in there from the teachers, and the junior senior class put that together and published that. It was called the Wapiti, and that has some association with the name Elks. And I worked on that and various things that came along that we had interest in. When you were juniors, we were in charge of the refreshment stand for the basketball games and things like that. And it was just whatever came along that needed to be done.
How fun. So you like to write and record things like that?
I've got a lot started.
Yes, that's great. Yeah, how interesting to be involved in so many other things. So I was also curious about dates. Where did you go on dates?
Well, most of the time we went downtown Dayton. I think there was 3 or 4 movie theaters, Lowe's, Keith's. I'm not sure of all of those, but we went downtown Dayton for a movie. We would stop at Papa Baltzer's. That was in Kettering. He was a little corner carryout type that most of the kids congregated at, and we'd have a snack and be home by curfew time. So it was something that there wasn't a whole lot of activities, going on for the kids at that time, but it seemed that everyone kind of stayed close to home. We didn't wonder, we didn't make trips or this type thing. We stayed close to home and we had a good time with it.
Everybody kind of did that on the weekends to the movies.
That was the main activity. That and when the ox roast come along, everybody attended that, and that was a big thing back in our time.
So tell me more about the ox roast.
Well, the ox wasn't ox; it was beef, and of course they fixed that in the kitchen there at the school, and then we had an open pit that we served it off of, and I worked at that not only when I was in high school, but when I got out of the service also. But that was a function that the Lions Club put on. It was a fundraiser. They raffled off a car, and it was quite a nice fundraiser for the Lions Club. So it was a very important function. Of course, Americana came along later, but in our time, the ox roast was the big thing.
Fun. I know I hear about the ox roast, and I know many people would love to have that again, so I'm not sure. Let's go back to what you did to earn money.
Well, when I was 16, I started working at the Village Market, which was at the corner of Franklin Street and Main Street. I worked there for 4 years, and also on Sundays I worked at Woody's Market in West Carrollton, and that was a kind of a choice job because I made more money there than I made in one day than I made all week at the Village Market. But it was a thing that you got so much for every customer that you waited on, and I always won the prize of the most customers waited on, because I was competing with college boys and other people that worked there at Woody's. But I hustled, and I made a few more bucks than I normally would have. But it was a blessing to have that kind of money, as a young man. It made me enough that I bought a 1940 Chevrolet, and when I was 16, paid cash for it. And I was pretty proud of that.
And that allowed you to take your
That
take
allowed
Sue
me
out on dates to
that
downtown
allowed me
Dayton.
to go to cross Route 48 and the railroad track and go to Rooks Road and pick up Sue and do the things that we wanted to do. But it was enough money that we had enough to do what we wanted to do. Not much, but it was you were frugal with your money. So
Yeah.
it was something that we well remember today, the activities that we had back in those days.
Freedom in a car, isn't that
Right.
that exists today as well with the young people having freedom? How about you, Sue? How did you earn money as a young person?
Well, I didn't work away from. I didn't actually have a job. Sometimes I would babysit for people that needed that, but I didn't work any place in particular. We were out in the country far enough that I didn't have transportation to get into town. It wasn't very far in, or to, assume some kind of a regular job. But so I don't know. I guess I just hung out on Rooks Road most of the time.
I'm sure your mother kept you very busy.
My mother kept me busy.
The house,
yes,
for
yes.
sure. Yes, mothers tend to do that, right?
But I learned a lot from her.
Yes, definitely. Well, with chickens and cows, did you milk a cow? Did you know how to do that?
Carefully.
Carefully?
Not often.
Not often. And gathering chicken eggs, or?
To this day, I think my favorite animal is a chicken.
I've always wanted chickens.
And we've had chickens on Rooks Road with us, and I think I passed that on to our eldest son because he has some on his property, and then he's got a little grandson that just thinks they are the most precious things that have come along. So I think that kind of was instilled by, having a likeness for chickens.
Yes, definitely. So did your mother teach you how to sew and cook and those kinds of things? Were those skills that she passed on to you?
My mother was a good cook. She had a lot of mouths to feed, and she was a good cook. And I can't say that I paid a lot of attention and was right at her elbow, but I've always enjoyed cooking, and can come out with some pretty substantial food when they show up.
Yes, it's a good skill to have because it makes people come home
Right.
to come and get what mom knows how to cook. All right. So one of our previous exhibits had a memory from each of you of a winter storm. Could you share these stories? And this time, is it okay if we start with Roy this time?
That'll be fine.
Okay.
Yes, probably the biggest storm that we were ever involved in was the storm of 1950. And that was the year that Ohio State beat Michigan in the snowstorm that you couldn't hardly see the field. But that storm came on Saturday morning, snowed us in practically. And by the first part of the next week, we were really snowed in. My brothers and I had kept the driveway open for my dad to get in because he worked second shift at Frigidaire. And he didn't make it to the house. He made it to the corner of 725 and Yankee Street, and he stayed overnight with the Belvos. But that storm was so bad that everything was closed down on Sunday afternoon. On Monday morning, a fellow by the name of Mr. Ralph Wolpert owned the building that the village market was in. That was run by Steve Spizak, who actually had the market. But on Monday morning, Mr. Wolpert called me and says, we need to open the store. And he was a fellow that was in the engineering business in Dayton. And he had been president of the school board. He was very active in the community. Anyhow, he got to the store, and I walked the 3 miles in the snow to get to the store so we could open it up. And a fellow by the name of Johnny Mann had gone to Dayton in his deuce-and-a-half truck to get milk and bread. And we supplied the community with milk and bread on that Monday. And from there, I think we opened the store on Wednesday. We did the same thing on Tuesday, and it was a storm to remember. And it's one that I remember yet today, and a lot of us older guys remember the football game as well. and Ohio State beat Michigan, I think by a field goal that particular game. But it was one to remember.
So that store, was that a store right at the corner of Centerville?
Exactly.
Franklin?
It's right on the corner of 48 and 725, where there's
A salon now.
salon now. Now, also across the street to the south was McCrae's grocery store, and it was only like a little delicatessen type store. Not much going on there. But I'll tell you a story about that also. One day I was carrying groceries out to a car, and I looked in the window of that store, and there was a fire in the trash can. And I gently went in, picked up the trash can, and set it out on the street. Whether that what would have happened if I hadn't have done that, I have no idea. But at least I had sense enough to pick that trash can up and take it out and let it burn out in the street.
You saved a building.
But McCrae's was just a little grocery, and Clarence McCrae was the owner of that store.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that story. I appreciate that. And it's interesting to think about these old buildings as grocery stores, and that they provided food for the people of Centerville that couldn't get it otherwise. So you performed this important service to the residents of Centerville to keep them fed during that storm.
Well, and I'll tell you another little story there. The Grant Farm, which is now Normandy Farm, they were down on Normandy Lane, and they called their grocery order in at least once a week, and I would take that down, and there was a lady by the name of Elizabeth that was the caretaker or head chef, everything. I think she did everything, but I would take her groceries down to her at least once a week down to Normandy Farm, and I can remember well carrying those groceries in for them down there.
So are you talking about the big mansion house?
The big mansion house, Normandy Farm.
Which is now Normandy Church.
Yes, that's correct.
Wow, how exciting, because it must have been very fancy in the days.
It was very fancy, and the Grants, what a history that family has, and what a history they have with the Normandy Farms here in this township.
And providing, I think they provided milk.
They provided milk. They had milk delivery. Fellow by the name of Elliott ran that dairy part of that farm, and Ace Elliott, the husband of Celia Elliott, one of the stalwarts of the Historical Society, was the fellow that ran the delivery route at that time. It was a big operation, yes.
Yes, having milk delivery, it's so interesting how delivery used to be such a big thing, and now it's kind of coming back, delivery as your food. It's so convenient having your food brought to you.
I hadn't really thought of that, but by golly, that's right, because we had bread delivery at the same time. Yeah, from White's Bakery.
Yeah. Oh, that would be so great to have fresh bread delivered to your. Oh, wonderful. Okay, Sue, will you tell me a story about your winter storm?
Well, my winter storm story isn't like his, because we were just stuck out there in the country with no provision or way to go anyplace. We just had to enjoy and endure what was going on. And of course, the chickens kept on laying and the cow gave milk, so we were pretty well set up. And but it was, it was a time you remember, because you don't have a storm like that often.
You couldn't go anywhere.
No.
But isn't that great to have your food already provided for you?
Oh, yes.
That's the convenience of having animals in your area.
Right.
Appreciate that. How about the story of the blizzard of 78?
The blizzard of 78, I was stranded out at my sister's north of town. I had been out there for some reason, staying with her for, a day or two, and the storm came in, and there I was just stuck there. There was no way to get back out to Centerville, and
So you had to wait out the storm.
And had to wait out the storm and just sit tight. So.
Yeah, well, every so often a big storm comes around like that and makes you realize how dependent we are upon the weather to get around. Yeah, do you have anything else?
And those that clean the roads and keep them clean for us when one does hit.
Yeah, did they have road service back then that they had ways to, clean
Not
up?
like today, though.
No, they're so efficient now, and we're so angry when it's not right away,
Right.
when we have to be stuck at any point. Okay, let's talk about how Centerville's changed in the time that you've lived here. And we'll start with Roy this time.
Well, it's as much as a day and night. Centerville back in our day was a little community. I'm not sure what year the status of city was acquired by the city of Centerville, but it was back during just about that time. I don't think we had over 5,000 people in the township and the city combined, but it was a little farm community. And people relied on the bus service that came through, the Greyhound bus that came through town. The bus station was at the old restaurant, Stagecoach Inn, which has, of course, been torn down and replaced by a dental office now. But that was the location of the bus stop, and people depended on that. The time before that, before I had a car, that we used to take the bus, and there was a little theater in Oakwood that we used to go to. I can't remember the name of that, but we also walked, and people walked and walked and walked because there was no other mode of transportation. But it was just something that you did. After activities at school, you walked home. You didn't have any other way to do that. I had a friend that lived on Spring Valley Road, and I would run to his house. We ran then cross country to go to school. We ran across the fields. Well, he was one of the fellows that was on that track team. So where did we start with that? Way back when.
Running across the field.
Yeah, just running, and that's the way we got around. There was no other way. So it was just a part of our life.
Yeah. And I'm going to back up a little bit because we're talking about the way Centerville's changed. As you were talking about your dating with Sue, you mentioned crossing the train tracks. And that's something we didn't talk about. So let's go back there.
Well, the train track ran from behind the Ace Hardware, which was then that would have been the
Centerville Mill,
the
sometimes
Centerville
people call
Mill.
it. Yeah.
Okay, and it ran on south through Lytle and on south to Lebanon. But that was a very active train track at that time. It's all been taken up now, and the property has been dispersed to neighboring properties. But yeah, it was a big thing to get to go on the other side of the tracks, let me tell you.
So what's Clio now? Was that the train tracks?
Well, it ran right. No, it went south. It went south from behind the mill.
Mm-hmm.
It went due south, crossed Spring Valley Road, right between what is now the Seventh-day Adventist School, just to the west of the school, and went on south, crossed Social Row Road. Right, it went through the property that Lee Snyder owns. And at that location, there was a watering facility at that location on the property that Lee owns now. So we went on south from there to Lytle, and it went practically parallel with Clio, but it left Clio at Tucker's Corner. Tucker's Corner was right there, just to the south of Centerville Station Road.
How interesting that you know exactly where it went. Did you ride on the train?
No, it wasn't a passenger train. It was a supply train. I don't remember what their main item of transport was, but it was not a passenger train. Some of the kids took rides on it. I mean, the guys were friendly that were on the train, and I remember that the Bradley kids got to ride on it because the Centerville Steel was right there also, and they would pick those kids up and bring them back then the same, within hours. But that was part of their fun time as well. Yes.
So it was part of the way goods were transported, and it sounds like there was steel in Centerville as well.
There was Centerville Steel Company, which was right to the north of Franklin Street, Centerville Station Road, which is now, I'm not sure what's in there now, but yeah, it's right next to the, there's a U-Haul or some such thing there.
Right.
But it's right next door to that.
The packaging store, right.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But yes, that was Centerville Steel, and they worked, they did a lot of work for Joyce Gridland Company, which is the hoist that you used to see in the old filling stations. That was their main item of production, was the hoist that went in those service stations. And Chuck Bradley is still living. He is the son of Clarence Bradley, who was the owner of that company. Chuck lives in Florida, and his wife, Mary, has since passed away. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you. That was a lot of history right there. Thank you for sharing that. Sue, how about observations you have noticed since Centerville, the time that you've lived here?
Well, in the beginning, you had a four-way stop at Main Street and Franklin, and that's
so no lights.
And no lights, no lights. And when the lights went up, I can remember when I first started to drive, my biggest fear was coming up 48 from the south and stalling my vehicle on that hillside, on that hill, trying to get on through the stoplight. That's early driving.
That is rough, yeah.
Right, but Centerville was it was just a neat area. It was a neat area to be associated with. There were churches here. There were the drugstore, and everything. The functions at the town hall. And you look back at the athletic events that we went to, and it was just a neat area. And coming in from the country, of course, that was like going into the big city when I came to Centerville, in town.
It's fun to think of Centerville as the big city.
It's the big city. It was.
And Centerville's still a wonderful place to live.
The group of kids that were associated right in the middle of town, there was a division in them. The ones that lived up by the grocery store and north, now this would take in the name of Bob Gregg, the football coach from Centerville. He was in on that group, and there was a fellow by the name of Bob Agnew, that they were the townies. And they lived right in the nucleus of Centerville. Okay, when the Platte was established on South on 48, the group of kids that lived down there were the Platte Rats. So they had, what is that called today? They had a division in their, and they kind of scrambled back and forth with each other. So that was, that was something. I wasn't involved with that because I couldn't get to town.
Oh, my goodness. So even there was distinctions according to where you lived.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm sure it still happens. So let's talk about Roy. You were involved also in the Americana Festival. So first of all, how did you become involved, and how has that changed over the years?
Well, the Americana is a great event for this city.
It is.
And I was originally put on that board as a representative of the Historical Society. I was supposed to represent the Historical Society, and by golly, they gave me a job as soon as I got there. So I was put in charge of the food, all the food vendors, and it was my job to sort out the good ones and the bad ones, and not invite the bad ones, and keep keep the food service pristine. I was on that board for I'm not sure 10 or 12 years. It was a little bit different then, because we as the staff we always cleaned up everything after the Americana Festival. You had to pick up, you spent a couple hours picking up trash, and you rode on the trash truck, and boy, you had to get your job done because they were going to open it up to traffic, and I think at 6 o'clock. But it was a thing. It was a labor of love, because everybody that was on that were, they were Centerville natives, and they were people that were interested in the community. And my service to that was strictly due to the fact that I loved my community and I wanted to help in some way. And I'm not sure. I think it was around 12 years that I served on that board. And it was a time. Jim Ruppert, God love his heart, he was the key to the Americana Festival for so many years. And he served our community, and he served it well. And he was the go-to guy. He was the chairman of that for so many years. And it was a thing that you wanted to help and help Jim with what he was doing. And he spent many, many hours being of service to our community.
It really takes some key people like that to benefit our community. And there's people today that are filling in for those people that have gone before to keep things going. And I know the Americana Festival has been a highlight of my family's life when we've been here. So thank you so much for keeping it going and participating with that. Do you have a favorite part of the Americana Festival, Sue?
Well, I can say when we look forward to going up and sitting in the Methodist Church front yard to observe the parade as it goes through town still, every year. I think we've only missed maybe a year in there, but that's always fun. I love to hear the bands and the cars and everything that goes on with it. It's just a neat day, and we don't miss that.
I know. It's a real sense of community. It makes you feel part of your community, your town, to cheer on the band and cheer on the officials and all the kids that are jumping rope or playing basketball or whatever it is, dancing. So it's a great thing to be involved in. So let's talk about Centerville, Washington history. You mentioned that before, Roy, and that's what got you into the Americana. What other things were you involved in with Centerville, Washington history?
Well, the Washington history, it goes back to how did we get started in that? A lady by the name of Celia Elliott. I hope they don't forget her name in this community. She was a stalwart. She was on the library board. She was a part of everything that went on in this community. But she got Sue and I interested in the Historical Society. And back in those were the days that Lynn Russell was here. and then Vicky Bondi took over after her, and of course now Cheryl. And I'll tell you what, there's three gals that have really been worthy of their jobs and have really done a super job of keeping the Historical Society moving and keeping them going in the right direction. That's what really got us started. And I want to mention that one thing that I'm very proud of is that in '09, we brought the Chautauqua presentation to the community. And I was president at that time. And what a week we had, and how that was attended. That was highly attended. I don't remember the numbers, but it was highly attended for that whole week. And what a joyous time this community had during that time. And that was brought to us. Through the Ohio Association. And the night that was presented to our board of the Historical Society, Celia Elliott was on that board. She was in her low 80s at that time, and she was so enthusiastic, and her comment was, "We can do this." And by golly, we did do it. But it was an inspiration from her that pushed us on to do that. And it was a lot of work, but it sure was. It was a fun time and a good time for the community.
You need those motivators, people in their 80s that can motivate people to work very hard for a common thing. Just for those who may be listening that are not familiar with what a Chautauqua is, do either one of you want to talk a little bit about what a Chautauqua might be?
Those presentations went back in history and were given. It was a lifetime presentation on those individuals, and every one of them was, it was just so neat to hear them. And you would walk around with them and be with them during the day or the evenings or what have you, and they would get up there and they would do that presentation on whomever they were talking about, and it was just a neat thing.
So they act in character
Yes.
about some historical person.
Individual, right.
How fun. And that's perfect for people who like history to be able to immerse yourself in that history. And you were you a president for Centerville Washington History?
For 2 years.
For
yes.
2 years and,
Yes.
and on the board and
Yes.
involved. And you mentioned that you were involved in Victorian tea with the Centerville Washington History. Is that what they used to do?
Right. They had, at a period of time, Janet Thobaben decided we needed to have a tea. And the first tea was held down at the Walton House, and I think there were like 4 tables of ladies. And Janet needed a little help, and I helped her. And from then on, Janet and I, we would pull the teas together every year. But from that first at the Walton House, it moved to Benham's Grove. And that's where the remainder of those entertainment afternoons for ladies, there was one gentleman that came to that every year. And it was an afternoon with a tea party and refreshments and entertainment, and we thought that was pretty neat.
A tea party's always fun, isn't it? You mentioned the Stagecoach Inn. And from what I remember, when the Stagecoach Inn got taken down, that was the impetus for starting Centerville Washington History, that the buildings were being torn down.
The architectural preservation was started and also the Historical Society as a result of that building being torn down. That building should still be standing there today. It was structurally sound. It was a tremendous brick building and a beautiful building, but it's gone, and that's part of our history that we are missing.
And so now what we're trying to do is preserve the history and make people aware of the value of the properties and find good uses for them so they can stay in business and keep the upkeep. Um, okay, so as many people move away from Centerville, what kept you here? And let's talk to Sue about that.
Well, we established our home on Rooks Road in '61 and started our family there. And my parents lived up the road. They were still living and lived up the road. And I kind of kept an eye on them for many, many years. And I didn't work outside the house. I was a homebody. And Roy worked in Dayton at the time for Wolpert's. And he had an offer of another job that would have it took him to Cincinnati, but it didn't take all of us because we still remained in Centerville for a long time, and that's where he retired from, was his job in Cincinnati. But we still maintained our residence on Rooks Road and raised our family here. We've had the pleasure of having 3 generations of our immediate family graduate from Centerville High School, which I'm kind of proud of.
That is amazing. That's so exciting. And Roy, you made that drive to Cincinnati for how many years just to keep your family here?
Well, I started in Cincinnati in 1965, and I retired in '05. So 40 years I drove that. But that was a time that I used that time well in planning my work and in the evening on the trip home. It was a relaxation time. So it wasn't wasted time. It was time that was well spent, and I was always glad to get home. I had a wife and a dog and 3 kids that welcomed me every night. But in doing that, we wanted to keep our kids here in the Centerville schools. We still follow those schools very closely. We have a son that's a psychology teacher, and he's been there for almost 30 years now. But it's kept us in touch. And we wanted to stay in touch with all that was going on in this community all during that time. I don't know where we would have moved had we moved to Cincinnati, probably in the Blue Ash area. But we made a corporate decision to stay in Centerville and stay here and keep our kids in this school.
And that they have the roots of family. They got to know people lived for a long time here and have those connections. It's a great root to have for a good foundation for a stable life.
Right.
Yeah.
Wouldn't trade it for a thing.
Yes. And you've since moved away from Rooks Road. And
yes, we've relocated after the 61 years there, but we're okay. It was time we made that move, and we're okay with we're located now, but we're still in the area.
Yes, and you've transitioned beautifully, and it takes a lot of courage to move on to a smaller place. But you're happy. It's so great you could be together all these years, and you have everything you need. You mentioned you were in the service, Roy, and this isn't one of our questions that we put up there, but I was just curious what branch of service and...
Well, I was drafted in 1957. I came home from work on a Saturday morning, and Sue was raking leaves, and she had just gotten the mail, and she said, "Guess what I got? My invitation to serve Uncle Sam." And that's what I did for the next. I went in December of '57, and I got out in December of '59. Luckily, I was in a profession that I got further training in the service, and we spoke of Mr. Wolpert earlier. And when I was on my way to Germany, which was in February or March of 58, I went to see him, and he says, I'll tell you what, he said, with the training you've had, I am offering you a job when you get out of the service. And that's exactly what I did, and that's what led me into the construction business. And that's what I did for a living. And that was my education as such, was in the service. But I was in the artillery, and yes, it was tough. Sue and I were married, but by golly, we got through it, and here we are today.
So you had to leave your wife, and you went over to Germany the whole time?
Well, I went to Fort Knox. I went from there to Fort Sill, and I went from Fort Sill to Germany. And orders had been cut for me to stay at Fort Sill as an instructor in artillery. But the orders prevailed for me to go to Germany, and that's where I went. And I was in Germany for 16 months.
Wow.
So that was the duration of my service, in 2 years.
And that was in your early married life, which makes sense why you built your house a little bit later, because he was gone.
Right.
And
Sue stayed home and saved money. A year after I got out of the service, we built her home. So, she was on a mission as well as I was.
absolutely, the taking care of the home front, right?
We had to work it out.
Yes, you did. And it's amazing to think about that, living apart for that time, and yet you stayed connected, I'm sure, through writing letters and
Oh my.
Every day.
every day.
There wasn't a lot of money saved either.
That's okay.
Not at $40 a week.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Very, very low income. Did you live with your family then?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that
Mhm.
saved, and I'm sure they loved having you there.
Yes, they did. We did.
Yeah. So my last question, and I so appreciate having the time to spend with you. You're wonderful people, and I love to hear the stories of Centerville. So what do you like about living in Centerville in the Washington Township area? We'll start with Sue.
Well, I think I like it here because we've maintained residence here for so long and have seen so many changes, and we still have great friends that are here that we associate with, that we went to high school with, and that's just part of staying in the community. You keep connected, and then you get involved with things that come along. When we first started out, I would have never thought I would have been involved with the Historical Society like I became for a period of time. But thanks to Celia Elliott, she said, Sue, it's time for you to get involved there. And I had the 3 little boys at that time, and they kept me busy. And at one period of time, when they were all in school at the right time, I joined the society and got a start there. And that's been a marvelous time.
That's wonderful. And Roy?
The reason I think that we have stayed here has been family, for one thing, and friendships, another. That's the reason we've been a key in the Alumni Association. That's the honor of being a part of a community that has meant so much to us. We still have a group that meets at Marion's once a month, and that's a group of graduates. Let me tell you, that group is getting pretty small at our age, but we still do that. But it's a spirit of community that we have enjoyed all these years, and we felt like we have been a part of that, and maybe have helped it a little bit. But it's something that I can't imagine service people the many times that they have to move. in that taking them away from their community. Our community is very precious to us, and we've been a part of it all of our lives, and we hope to have another few years remaining in that.
Thank you. I love how you talked about community. I think that's what so many people struggle to find, a sense of community. So thanks for sharing that, and thanks for being here today. I've loved getting to know you, and I'm sure there's more to learn, but that's all the time we have today. So I'd love to thank Miami Valley Communication Council for helping with this podcast, and my guests, Sue Brown Turton and Roy Turton, for taking the time to be here today. If you have an interesting Centerville story, please contact Centerville Washington History. Please also come and visit our museums Tuesday through Friday, 12 o'clock to 4 p.m. We have 3 locations: 26 North Main Street, 89 West Franklin, and 79 North Main Street. For more information about historical buildings and people, please check our website, centervillewashingtonhistory.org. Bye-bye.